Yeah. If only it were that easy. Yeah, so okay, here we have it. Here's kind of where we sit, and there is to where we want to move, right? And we get into the Enneagram and we start thinking about all of the ways we are habituated and we are patterned and we are functioning in a way that is less than conscious. So what do we do about that? How do we shift? How do we start the process of moving out of the patterns? We practice. So I know a lot of people here are already in the contemplative prayer, centering prayer. Who has a centering prayer practice? Most everybody. Who has a otherwise meditative practice? Good. So this is what we start to do. And for those of you who mentioned like contemplative prayer and the Enneagram going together, it's like they very, very much do. And I think one of the things that I love about centering prayer is like it creates a space, right? It starts to loosen that kind of glued on feeling we have, stimulus and response. It's like right here. Something happens and we react. Something happens, we react. Something happens, we react. There's no room to breathe in that. And so contemplative prayer is kind of that the start of this opening, this space growing. And then you think, well, why do we need the space? Because without the space, we're going to keep running our patterns. And the space is what gives us the opportunity to choose something different, if we have that ability. So when we talk about contemplative prayer or just a general meditation practice, or even like a physical yoga practice, all of these things are creating space, right? But without the right intention, we're not actually creating the capacity or the ability to change. There's a space and there's kind of an intuitive process that can happen in that space. But if we want to, I hesitate to say like jumpstart our growth, because it's not something that we're trying to win or something that we're trying to, speed through. But if we want to be more intentional about that, we have to be more intentional about how we practice. And so we're going to use this system, the way of viewing things, as a way to conceptualize how we practice. So I'm going to redraw. So we have our head center, our heart center, and our body center. And each one of these, we conceptualize them as separate, which they aren't. Okay, first of all, they are not separate. So, and I think that, like I mentioned earlier, the Panchamaya model, so the model of yogic understanding, is super helpful here because Pancha means 5. So they have 5 different levels of being. Maya means all pervading. So when people are talking about the Panchamaya, they're talking about the 5 different levels that are all together. Like you can't separate one level out from something else. So in looking at that, we look at the 3 centers of intelligence. We look at these 3 places that we exist. And it's easy to look at this and be like, oh, well, here's a thing, and here's a thing, and here's a thing. But the reality is, it's all one thing. They are all together. You cannot have a thought that doesn't have an emotional capacity. You can't have a thought that happens outside of your body. You can't have a sensation that doesn't trigger an emotion. And you can't have a sensation that doesn't trigger a thought. You can't have a feeling that doesn't happen in your body. And you can't have a feeling that doesn't also simultaneously happen with a thought. All of these things are happening together. We're just particularly more tuned into one than we are to others. So our type is more focused on certain aspects of our being. And so in relaxing the type, we allow ourselves a fuller experience of who we are. So if I'm constantly focused on doing in my body center, I can feel things and I have thoughts about things, but I don't necessarily tune those into emotions. But they are. They're still emotions. I don't conceptualize them that way enough. I mean, I've done a lot of work around that because I've had to. But we're just more tuned into one level of the experience than to the others. But they're all happening in the same time. And with that, that means that we can practice in a way that directly affects one of our centers and then indirectly affects the others. So this is one of the things that I like to talk about, is that if you just are doing like the very baseline of like Enneagram work and understanding, over time, your type tends to run itself out of a job. Like the more you learn and the more you understand, even if you're not actively working on these things, there is a process happening because you're directly affecting your dominant center, which is also working on your other centers. Like it's happening simultaneously. But what we want to talk about here is how to be more intentional about the ways in which we practice. So when we talk about practice, our practice is directly affecting one of these and indirectly affecting the others. So like if you go for a run, you might feel better. You might feel a little more clear-headed. You might have a little more emotional space. If you sit down and do your meditation, suddenly you're not as emotionally reactive. And depending on the meditation, maybe like your body feels a little bit different. And so what we want to do is be able to work with each center in a way that is necessary for our type. So we're going to talk about 3 main ways of practicing.